So, when you ask my friends to describe me, here are the words that usually come out. Japanese, Vietnamese, an economics nerd, and for those of you who know me better, a kid with ADHD who has way too much energy for his own good. But the part of me that I want to share with you today, the part of me, the part of who I am, is the fact that I'm bisexual. Now, to me, it means something quite simple. Being bi means that I have the ability to appreciate everyone's butts. Now, in a more complex manner, that means that I'm attracted, both physically and emotionally, to members of both genders. On September 23rd, 2014, I came out publicly with this fact. The responses that I received made me feel like my family has extended to hundreds of friends scattered around the world. I felt so appreciated and loved. Unfortunately, though, the entire coming out journey I went through wasn't as rosy as this one single incident. It had its ups and downs. There were moments when I wanted to kill myself. And so I want to tell my story today to understand exactly what happened, but more importantly, to understand why I'm still here today, so that my story doesn't need to be repeated again. We go back 21 years. I was born just an hour north of Tokyo. My parents were Vietnamese, but as my dad was a physicist teaching at a university in Japan, I grew up as an immigrant. It was also the place where I developed my first crush for a girl in my kindergarten years. It was a kind of crush that meant talking to her and holding her hand meant that we're boyfriends and girlfriends. So I had a pretty good time growing up. When I was 9, my parents decided that it would be better for my sister and me to go back to Vietnam. So here I was at 9 years old. In May 2002, our family moved to Hanoi, the capital city, where I would continue to spend the next 9 years in. It was also the time when pop stars like Aaron Carter and Jesse McCartney was rising and taking over the world by storm. And when I discovered them, I noticed something. I was weirdly attracted by them. So the first reaction I got was, damn, they're attractive. The second thing, I panicked. And third, I got scared. Because in Vietnam at the time, being anything other than straight meant that you were corrupt, that you were something that needed to be fixed, needed to be eradicated. So I had to rationalize this new feelings that I had somehow. I knew that I wasn't gay because I still had feelings for girls. And the reason that I would come up to convince myself that I was straight was that I wanted to be like them. I wanted to be like those pop stars so that I can get all the girls, all the popularities. Obviously, that plan to be like a pop star didn't work out too well. So in 2011, I graduated from high school and moved to Canada to start studying here at UBC. Within the first few days of being in this school, I met someone that would change everything because that friend identified as bi. Within a few weeks of interacting with him, something clicked. It made sense in my head. Just like that, in October 2011, I came out to him. Now, he probably doesn't remember this as he was quite inebriated at the time, but what he said to me still sticks with me until today. He said that if I ever needed someone to talk to, he would be there for me. And this created this space of trust, this newfound confidence in my identity that allowed me to come out gradually to all of my friends at UBC. At the same time, my desire to give back to this community who has helped me so much also grew. Two things stopped me from actually acting on this desire, though. The first reason was that I have yet to come out to my parents. And so I didn't feel that I was in any position to mentor anyone who is going through the same issue. But also, I felt like my identity was still being denied, not only by some of the straight friends that I had, but also by some gay and lesbian friends that I had. Statements about me like, oh, you're just confused. Oh, you're bi. Does that mean you're gay? You kissed that one guy at that party. Does that mean you're gay? you kissed that one girl at another party, does that mean you're straight again? Was quite constant in my life. And this stopped me from feeling like I was comfortable to give back to that community. That's when I discovered and learned about EqualDex. Now, EqualDex is a project started by Dan Leveille, a designer, a developer, and a marketing manager based in Los Angeles. When he created this project, his idea was to create a global database of LGBTQ plus issues, starting from the legal structure. Being an economics and data nerd, when I talked to Dan, I knew this was something I wanted to do. So in the next few months, Dan and I, along with a fantastic group of volunteers, built up the site. I was working as an alpha tester, and then a researcher, and now a moderator. We officially launched in February of this year, and now we're curating about more than 1,300 laws across these 9 dimensions that you see here, starting anywhere from legality of homosexuality to blood donation laws to legal right to change your gender. And working on EqualDex has opened my eyes to this whole new lens of LGBTQ plus that I have not seen. As an example, here's the graph that was curated through EqualDex that I was fortunate enough to work with. A graph of marriage equality. Green here means that there's full constitutional recognition of same-sex marriage. Blue means that there's some provision for civil union or domestic partnership. Red means that same-sex marriage is either not recognized or is actively punished by the legal system. So working on this, again, built up this new lens to look at LGBTQ plus issues for me. It also built up my confidence in my identity, and I knew it was time. Just like that, on September 23rd of 2013, exactly 1 year before my public come out, I came out to my parents. To this day, I still don't know what pushed me. I remember being especially determined in the morning, and just going to the bus, getting to my office, and open Facebook to send them a message. Hopefully, quite fortunately, my manager wasn't looking behind me at the time, and they replied a few hours later while I was in an economics lecture. And the response made me feel like I was punched in the stomach, despite my parents being an ocean away in Vietnam. They threatened to disown me if I was ever with a guy. The exact wordings that my parents chose was that if I was ever with a guy, I didn't need to come back to the house. I didn't need to visit their graves either. And the next few months were especially hard on me. I mean, 2 of the arguably most important people in my life just rejected me for being who I was. There were moments where I felt like I was dancing on the cliff edge between life and death, not knowing when or if I was going to fall down. I'm not the only one who went through this. Research by Steele and Brennan shows that in Canada, bisexual males are 6.3 times more likely to consider suicide than their heterosexual counterparts. The same number for gay men is only 4.1 times. Bisexual female doesn't fare any better either, as they're more likely to consider suicide by 5.9 times than their heterosexual counterparts. The same number for lesbian individual is 3.5. When I first saw these numbers, I felt infuriated. In a kind of society where being yourself was empathized, where you were supposed to follow your dream and your passion, these individuals died precisely because they tried to be who they are. I was even more baffled when I realized that Canada has one of the strongest discrimination protection in the world. So again, this map was curated through working with EqualDex. Green means that there's full protection for both sexual orientation and gender identity, explicitly spelled out within the legislation. Blue means that there's some form of partial protection, and red means that there's no protection at all. And in this graph, you may wonder, why is Canada blue? The reason why Canada is blue here is because Canada does not explicitly spell out gender identity within its discrimination legislation, despite it being heavily implied. And so it just didn't make sense to me that all these were going on with the discrimination, with all these people killing themselves. And I realized one thing. The legal structure, despite being amazing, does not prevent discrimination, especially the kind of discrimination that I, along with many other bi individuals, has to go through. The kind of discrimination that erases our identity, the questions that I mentioned earlier. And yet, I'm still here. So I had to ask myself again the question, what was different about my story? What did I have that so many of these individuals, a teenager in Buffalo, New York, 3 years ago who killed himself, did not have? And the answer was quite simple. I had my friends. And there are 3 things that they did that saved me. And I have 3 stories about 3 friends to tell you now. The first story is that of happiness. There were moments, there were mornings after I came out to my parents where I did not want to get out of bed, where I felt so tired emotionally to go through with the day. In those mornings, what got me out of bed was the lectures I had with Michelle. We would always end up sitting at the back, trying to contain our laughter and giggles as we commented on what was going on, what our professor was saying, how this one guy nearly tripped our professor with his power cord. And in those moments, I was happy because Michelle was happy, and her happiness was contagious. Even just for a moment, I could forget that the situation of coming out to my parents was going on. Even just for a moment, I could focus on containing that laughter, on being happy. The second story is that of empathy. Logan, one of the closest friends that I have, was exchanging at Singapore at the time, being as geographically removed as one can be from this whole drama. Yet, he still answered all the questions that I had for him. He still talked to me every time I needed to talk to him, trying to understand what was going through in my head. And those conversations not only allowed him to understand the situation better, it also allowed me to know what was going on in my head, to know myself a little better, to be able to love myself a little bit better every day. And I still appreciate his effort in doing that until today. The third story is that of vulnerability. The friend's name is Gary, and the time of the year is mid-December. We were driving to the mall, hoping to pick up some gift for our friends. And I was updating him on how I came out to my parents, just leaving enough details so that I wouldn't break down right then and there in his car. As soon as I finished, though, Gary talked about how he ran away from home, of his relationship with his parents. And in that moment, he created a space of trust. By being vulnerable with me, by being completely himself, by not hiding, he created the environment that allowed me to be vulnerable with him as well. And for the entire car ride, we talked about every single details of both of our stories. And it marked the first time I was able to talk about it without shedding a tear. I still had a few months to go after that, but it was still the first time. So happiness, empathy, vulnerability. Those are what allowed me to be here today. My hope is that my story doesn't need to happen. My hope is that coming out in the future is a conversation as casual as the choice for the dinner of that day, as you can see on the screen. We know that it's not, though. And we know that every day people around us are dying because they cannot be who they are. But here's a fact. I'm here, I'm alive, and I exist. And that's because each of you have the power to save a life. And I'm not exaggerating. Many of you have already done that. And honestly, because you don't know the impact you can make in someone's life just by looking around you, just by sharing that happiness that you have, just by trying to understand what is going on with others' life, and more importantly, to be vulnerable with someone. And that means being completely yourself, but sharing your story. And who knows, just by doing that, just by doing just that, you might be able to save a life. Thank you.